Hi guys, Geekonomics here once again, and today I'm bringing you the next in the series on market structures. So we've looked now at perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition. Now we're going to look today at one which is quite complicated. I think it's the whole business of oligopoly, and particularly the demand curve with regard to oligopoly is quite confusing. I'm sure you'll agree. So, what do we mean first of all by an oligopolistic market structure? We mean a market in which there are a small number of large firms. So for example, the supermarket industry is a great example of an oligopolistic industry. The mobile phone telecommunications industry, great example of an oligopolistic industry. Difficult word to say actually, isn't it? Oligopolistic. A bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, I digress, ladies and gentlemen. The second key characteristic is that firms act strategically because they know whatever decision they make, particularly with regard to output and price, that will impact not only themselves and their own company, but it will also impact the output and the price of their competitors. And so this notion of firms acting strategically, this is very important. The actions of one firm have an appreciable effect on the actions and the responses of other firms. And those of you who've maybe looked at game theory with regard to oligopolistic markets, you'll know what I'm talking about here. So, oligopolistic markets are characterized by something, I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's not a demand curve, it's known as the kinked demand curve. Named after a very famous economist called Paul Sweezy, and hence it's also sometimes referred to as the Sweezy model. So before we get to the kinked demand curve, which you can see here, I'm going to do you a sort of a little simplified version of it, because I think if you can understand this, it's much easier to understand this simplistic one versus this one. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what have I got here? I've got an inelastic demand curve, this red one, and I've got an elastic demand curve, the blue curve. And I've got a price here, P star, and an output of Q star. Now, let's consider this is the market for oil, for example. And you're an oil producer, you're an oil producing and exporting country, so you're a member of OPEC. Let's consider what would happen if you increased your price, but your competitors and the other nations kept their price at P star. Consider the impact on your quantity demanded. Now, the quantity of your product demanded would be highly sensitive, wouldn't it? Because if you raise your price, but all your competitor nations keep their price the same, P star, then what will happen to your demand? It will drop off very, very significantly. And so you would be on this section here, be on that section of this very elastic demand curve. Let's consider the alternative. All the OPEC nations, they all get together and they all say, and they all agree, okay, let's do something with prices, let's not raise prices, let's lower prices. So you might go out on a limb and you might say, right, okay, I'll lower my price and see what happens. And so you lower your price. Well, what will all the other member nations do? They will lower their price as well. And so the relative sensitivity of that price change will mean that you actually will not pick up much more demand, if any at all, and hence the reason why you would be on this section of the inelastic demand curve here. So the raising of the price is non-threatening. The reducing of the price, that is a very threatening behaviour. And it results in the elastic and the inelastic parts. Now obviously, if I were to take this board rubber, ladies and gentlemen, and do this, and if I were to take this board rubber, ladies and gentlemen, and do this, then straight away we have, in essence, the Sweezy model. We have the kinked demand curve right in front of our eyes. Isn't it a marvellous sight to behold? So that's the Sweezy model. Now let's apply this to the more complicated diagram which you would be expected to know and to explain and to draw in the exam. So here it is, in all its glory. So we've got elastic demand, inelastic demand, for the reasons I've just explained. We've got P star, Q star. Now you may have heard of the term related to oligopolistic markets. You may have heard of the term price rigidity. So the price doesn't really tend to change a lot. They tend to agree on a price, and that price remains fairly constant and static. Now, because of the changing elasticity of the demand curve, it also has an effect on the marginal revenue. And so you can see that the marginal revenue to a point, that point being Q star, on the elastic part, it goes to here. But then, look, there's a discontinuity in it. There's a discontinuity, and it goes to here, and then it continues on once again, in line with the elasticity of the inelastic demand curve. Now, this discontinuity in the marginal revenue curve, this is very important for costs and prices. And what does it mean? Well, this is what it means. It means that marginal costs, so the additional, the extra, you know that marginal, another word for marginal is extra. You know that the marginal costs can fluctuate within this discontinuity, within this band, and the price, ladies and gentlemen, get this is the important point, the price does not change. It is, as I've just said, the price is rigid. There. Price rigidity. Marginal costs fluctuating between this band, yet the price remains constant. The price remains rigid. In the exam, obviously, you will be expected to be able to explain this, explain the average revenue, marginal revenue, but the marginal cost issue here, this is very important. So the fact that, for example, petrol price, I've just been saying to my year 11 who are sat behind the camera, ladies and gentlemen, at the moment watching this, I've just been saying to them that oil prices for the first time this year have gone up. Well, that does not necessarily mean that when I drive home this evening and have to fill up the VW, that does not necessarily mean that the cost of petroleum at the pump will be more expensive, because there is this flex within the discontinuity and the marginal revenue curve. A very important point of analysis. Okay, now, what then are the other key characteristics of oligopoly? Cartels, ladies and gentlemen. Firms coming together, grouping together, and agreeing to fix price. Now, of course, that is, in most countries, that is illegal. In the UK, the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority. If firms did that in this country, the Competition and Markets Authority, they would be on this like a hot potato, and they would be finding out what's going on, and they would be ruling against it, and they would be splitting up cartels like this. Cartels in most countries are illegal. However, we do know that OPEC nations, oil producing and exporting countries, they do get together and they do agree on price and output. And it's such a great example of game theory. I was at Durham University with my year 12 students not so long ago, and Professor Shackett there, he led a little session for us, and part of that was all about OPEC and the way in which game theory works in the oil industry, the way in which if Iran, which of course has just had many sanctions lifted by the American government, and so now Iranian oil is flowing into the global economy, well, the oil production there obviously has an impact on oil prices, and that then affects what the Saudi Arabian government will choose to do with their output, which so has a knock-on effect on price and so on. And that is game theory. That is game theory in action, economics in action, ladies and gentlemen. So OPEC's a great example. And that's what's known, ladies and gentlemen, as tacit collusion. When OPEC get together, and the dominant country in that case is actually Saudi Arabia. And most countries are looking to the Saudi Arabians to follow their lead in that respect, so that there's a dominant price leader. You may have also heard of price leadership associated with oligopoly, not just price rigidity. And that's what we would mean by price leadership. And then finally, there's another type of collusion. It's called barometric price leadership. So in other words, what you would do is, you'll have heard the word barometer, a sort of a barometer. Well, you might decide to go out on a limb, and as a barometer, you might say, right, okay, I'm going to raise my price for a couple of days and see what happens. I'm going to measure what happens. What do other countries do? What do other firms do in response? As a barometer. And that's barometric price leadership. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's I think that's about it on oligopoly. As ever, any messages or questions, do get in touch, send me a comment, send me a message, and I'll try and get back to you. Keep subscribing, keep spreading the word on Geekonomics, ladies and gentlemen, and bye for now.